Shabbat Shalom. I want to begin a conversation with all of us today that will not end when the sermon ends and probably won't end after lunch either. But I want to begin a conversation that should intentionally go on for some time. It's not an easy conversation. It's a conversation about intermarriage. We read in our Torah portion this week, Parashat Bamidbar, about Moses taking a census of the Israelites as they were preparing to enter the Promised Land. And during the Exodus, they were to come across a number of countries, if you will, against tribes, people that opposed the Israelites passing through. And so knowing that war lay ahead, Moses enacts in our Parashat this week a census to count the number of Israelite men above the age of 20 who were suitable for war. In this case, Moses is acting as a general and needs to know who his troops are. And that idea struck me of this census. Who do we count? Oftentimes I I feel as if I am a soldier for the Jewish people, trying to secure our future. Who do we count among our ranks as fellow soldiers? I think it was in 1972 that the Rabbinical Assembly, my union, if you will, the organization of conservative rabbis, came forward and enacted what is called a standard of rabbinic practice, ultimately forbidding conservative rabbis from performing intermarriage and from even attending intermarriage. So now on record, if a conservative rabbi performs an intermarriage or even attends an intermarriage, he or she is subject to expulsion from the movement. They can't find a job again as a conservative rabbi. That's how serious the movement took this initiative some 40 years or so ago. That it was only on grounds of expulsion that a conservative rabbi could perform in intermarriage. We are now a generation later, and the conversation has come up again as part of the Rabbinical Assembly. The conversation has come up again as we continue to watch the numbers of the Jewish people shrink, as we continue to watch affiliation decline. Ought we, as a conservative movement, to consider again the idea of allowing our rabbis to perform intermarriage? The issue gained even more steam just recently when the United Synagogue of Conservative Judaism, the umbrella organization for conservative synagogues, slightly changed its bylaws. It used to be that USCJ forbade its congregations from allowing membership to any non-Jew. That is to say, if there were an intermarried couple among the congregation, that couple could only pay for membership for the Jew. The non-Jew was not allowed any rights as a member of the synagogue. And the USCJ this past late winter ultimately made the decision to allow its congregations to make the decisions for themselves. It doesn't say you can, it doesn't say you can't, it doesn't say you have to. It says that each congregation is now empowered to define membership in its own way. So what that could mean is that a conservative congregation welcomes an interfaith couple as a full member of the congregation. Now, parts of us say that's a great thing. It's certainly good for dues. They have to pay full couple rates now. It's certainly good for the value of hachnasat orchim, of being a welcoming community, because we want to welcome people into our midst. But if we're giving non-Jews full rights as members of a synagogue, does that mean we have to give them full rights on the bima too? That when someone is called for aliyah to the Torah and says, Asher bachar banu mikol amim, blessed are you, God, who chose us from among all the peoples, that we're going to allow a non-Jew to say those exact same words? Does that mean if we're giving full rights to an interfaith couple that we're going to allow the non-Jewish part of that couple to serve on our board of trustees? or to have a vote for the board? Would we be willing to allow that non-Jewish spouse in the interfaith couple, who's a full dues-paying member of the congregation, to become president of our synagogue? When we start to go down this road of how we welcome and how we embrace the interfaith couple into our community, lots of questions are raised. So now, as we begin this conversation about our relationship to the large number and growing number of interfaith couples among the Jewish people, there are lots of questions that need asking. But if we go back and we look at the history of interfaith relationships among the Jewish people, we go all the way back to Abraham and Sarah. And it says in the Torah that Abraham and Sarah, when they began their journey to the Promised Land, after God said to Avram, Lech Lecha, go forth, it says actually that Abraham and Sarah went forth with the souls that they made. That's what the Torah tells us. With the souls that they made. And the rabbis came to teach that these were the people that they had converted to what we now call Judaism, but had converted to this faith of ours, this monotheism, early on in his homeland, and joined Avram and Sarah on their way to the Promised Land. When it came time for Avram and Sarah to find a wife for Isaac, of course, there was no Jewish community at the time for Isaac to choose from. There was no J-date yet. So ultimately what Abraham and Sarah did was they sent Isaac back to Abraham's family, that Isaac should have a wife from among the clan. It was about marrying within the clan. And the Torah then tells us later that when Isaac came to look for spouses for his children, ultimately he sent Jacob back to Rachel's family, right, to find marriage within the clan. And Isaac is very upset later when Esau brings home a wife who's not part of the family, if you will, who's not part of the tribe. Jacob, however, seems to take a little different approach. Jacob is much more flexible, it seems, with the idea of intermarriage. After all, after the situation between Dinah and Shechem, Jacob gave permission for Dinah to marry Shechem. Later on, Joseph in Egypt would meet Osnat, and they would get married. Could it be that Jacob was much more flexible with this idea of interfaith marriage? Could it be that Yaakov, who's also known as Yisrael, the man for whom we're named, was much more willing to accept non-Jews, as they were, non-Israelites, into his midst? Perhaps. Fast forward in time, and ultimately we come to the exile of the Jewish people from Eretz Yisrael, from the tribe, or really the land of Judea, in the year 586 BCE. And they're kicked out and they're sent to Babylonia. And there many of the Jews intermarry with the Babylonians. Some 50 years later, they come back to resettle the Promised Land and to build a new temple. And at that time, Isaiah, the prophet Isaiah, says, let's welcome into our midst all who choose monotheism. All who will recognize God will take amongst ourselves. Isaiah was looking to make it easier for these interfaith couples to reassimilate into Judaism. The prophet Haggai, however, said differently. And he said that no non-Jew should be found amidst our people. It's abhorrent and a sin. And Ezra, the great political leader of the day, actually wanted to require all Israelite men who married non-Israelite women to divorce their non-Israelite spouses. Now, our leadership saw the great problem that would arise when you have all these mass divorces and what it would mean for the people, and etc. And ultimately, that's where this idea of conversion began really taking hold. Because we didn't want them to have to divorce. We wanted these non-Israelite spouses to become Jewish. Thus began conversion. Now, the central text that we really need to wrestle with, if we're even going to raise this question of intermarriage, comes from the book of Deuteronomy. And if you'll please turn with me to page 1029 in the Eitz Chaim Chumashim, 1029. In Deuteronomy we read, again I'm on page 1029, chapter 7. when the Lord your God brings you to the land that you're about to enter and possess. Right here, Moses is addressing our ancestors before they enter the promised land without him. When the Lord your God brings you to the land that you're about to enter and possess, and God dislodges many nations before you, the Hittites, the Girgashites, the Amorites, the Canaanites, the Perizzites, the Hivites, and the Jebusites, 7 nations much larger than you, and the Lord your God delivers them to you and you defeat them, you must doom them to destruction. Grant them no terms and give them no quarter. God's saying, wipe out the pagans among you. God is saying those people who currently live in the land who practice idol worship, those people who live in the land who practice child sacrifice, you must wipe them out. Moses goes on to say, you shall not intermarry with them. Do not give your daughters to their sons or take their daughters for your sons, for they will turn your children away from me to worship other gods. And the Lord's anger will blaze forth against you, and God will promptly wipe you out. Unlike many of the mitzvot in the Torah that simply say don't or do, this one we have a reason for. Why are we prohibited from intermarriage? Because those non-Jews will turn our children away from God to worship other gods. They'll lead us astray. So here we are now in 2017, and it's just us. We're friends. You're the serious ones. You're the ones who come every week. Let's begin the conversation now amongst us. Assimilation continues to rise dramatically. Affiliation with synagogues is on the decline. It's not the non-Jews that are leading us away from Judaism. It's not the non-Jews that are leading us away from Jewish practice or leading us away from faith in God. We're doing it to ourselves. We're doing it to ourselves. So if that's the case, is it so bad that we should allow a non-Jew in our midst? They're not the ones leading us away. We're the ones leading us away. And what, as we know from our own anecdotal evidence, what if that non-Jew who marries into our family is actually more interested in Judaism than our kids are? What if that non-Jew will actually be the one who drives our kids to religious school? What if that non-Jew is the one who's actually seriously considering conversion but is not ready yet for whatever reason? And he or she is willing to take the faith that much more seriously than the one who is born among us, than our own children or grandchildren. What do we say to all that anecdotal evidence that we know among us of the non-Jews in our midst who are more serious about Judaism than our own kids and grandkids, who can actually help bring our children or our grandchildren back to the faith of Israel? That being said, the statistics are pretty bad. When it comes to interfaith marriage, the odds of an interfaith couple practicing Judaism is pretty much slim to none. Despite what we know from our anecdotal experience, the odds of an interfaith couple committing to a Jewish life and living a Jewish life as we, those who take this seriously, as we would define it, it's highly unlikely. And all the more so if the non-Jewish member of the couple is the wife. Because even though it's 2017, the wife still controls the home. And the wife, by and large, controls the religion in the home. And so when it's a non-Jewish wife entering the family, they're significantly more likely to have a non-Jewish household than if the wife is Jewish and the husband marrying in is not. The statistics work against the anecdotes. But not only are the anecdotes real, they're part of our mishpacha. And I stand here before you mindful that even though I'm doing everything in my power for my 10-year-old and my 7-year-old to marry somebody Jewish when it comes time to marry, I know that there are no guarantees. I know that despite living in a Jewish house and being active in a synagogue, sending my kids to Israel, sending them to Jewish camps, sending them to day school, I'm doing everything you're supposed to do. There are no guarantees. But our movement tells us that if, God forbid, if my children were to intermarry, not only could I not perform their marriage, I couldn't even attend. What are we going to do? Here we are in 2017, and we've got real tsuris. We, each of us, are soldiers for the Jewish people, just like in our Parashat, where God took a census of those standing up to fight for the Jewish people. Will we make the Jewish people stronger by continuing to keep the wagon circled, by keeping the doors closed? Or will we make the Jewish people stronger by throwing them open and saying, all who want to enter, you are welcome to join us? What are we going to do to keep our people strong and growing? Now, it's true that if all liberal Jews made a commitment to have at least 3 children, that would help. If we're going to do that, we also have to make a commitment to make day school much cheaper and Jewish life much cheaper. But at the end of the day, the question is going to come back to this one of intermarriage. What are we going to do as those committed to strengthening the Jewish people? As I was wrestling with this question, and again, we're just beginning the conversation here now. I'm not looking to end the conversation today. I have no one answer for us. But I'm reminded by what my teacher taught him in the name of his teacher, Rabbi Professor Jacob Rader Marcus. And our teacher said to us in the midst of rabbinical school, when you look out at a congregation and you count the number of people in attendance, most rabbis count the number of feet that are there, thereby doubling the actual number of people in attendance. Most congregational presidents count the number of bodies of those in attendance. That's who's here. But our professor said to us, don't count feet and don't count bodies. Count souls. Sure, you could have 1,000 people in your midst, but how many of them are really soldiers for the Jewish people? How many of them are really committed to building the future of the Jewish people? And as we count the souls among us, ought we to count the non-Jewish souls as well, if they're just as, if not more, committed to strengthening the Jewish people? This Shabbat of Parashat Bamidbar, as we take a census of our people, let us begin to ask the question, who among us will we count? Adonai ozi amo yitain, Adonai yivarech et amo v'shalom. May God bless the Jewish people with strength and with continuity. And may God bless us all with peace. Amen.